All right, so last time we left off with that AI oracle, and it was dropping some serious truth bombs. Do you remember?
How could I forget? It claimed humanity's biggest blind spot is understanding its own consciousness. Pretty bold statement.
Right. It's honestly been keeping me up at night ever since.
Oh, wow.
So you and I, we're diving into the deep end of consciousness today, trying to answer, what is this mysterious thing?
Yeah.
And how on earth do scientists even begin to study it? And what are the biggest head scratchers they're facing? What do you think?
Well, you're certainly not alone in your fascination. This is something that has captivated philosophers and scientists for centuries. And it's a field just teeming with more questions than answers. Like you said, even pinning down a definition of consciousness is a challenge.
Yeah, that much jumped out at me from all the articles that you sent over. It's like trying to explain what seeing red feels like to someone who has been blind since birth.
Yeah.
Where do you even start with that?
Yeah, it's a surprisingly apt analogy, actually. There's a lot of debate even about what constitutes consciousness, right? Some researchers would argue there's a difference between the raw subjective experience of something, like what it feels like to see the color red, versus the thoughts about it we can actually put into words. But this distinction, while important, just makes our task even harder.
Right, so are we stuck then? If we can't even agree on what we're talking about, how can we even study it?
Not at all. It just means that we need clever approaches. A lot of research focuses on finding what are called neural correlates of consciousness. Basically, think of it like this. We're trying to pinpoint which instruments in an orchestra are essential for a specific musical effect.
Okay, I think I'm with you.
Yeah.
So instead of one consciousness instrument, it could be the interaction of many different brain areas.
Exactly. Like, is it a solo violin that creates a chill? Or the entire orchestra swelling together? That's the kind of puzzle researchers are tackling when it comes to consciousness in the brain.
So no easy, we found the consciousness center moment then, huh?
Not quite. We're finding that it's way more intricate than just a single on-off switch in the brain. For example, there's this theory called the global neuronal workspace theory, which suggests consciousness emerges when information is shared across many brain regions.
Okay.
So imagine a massive broadcast system allowing different parts of the brain to like chat and work together.
Okay.
That's the basic idea.
Okay, I'm starting to see how complex this is, but walk me through why this actually matters. What difference does it make if my brain is a broadcast network or not?
Well, what's fascinating here is this implication that consciousness might not be just a binary on-off state.
Okay.
It could be more like a dimmer switch with varying levels of awareness.
A dimmer switch, you say. So you're saying you could be what, like a little bit conscious? Tell me more.
Yep. That's precisely the idea. Researchers talk about connected consciousness, where we're fully present and aware, versus disconnected consciousness, like when we're daydreaming or even asleep and we're dreaming. And get this, researchers are developing tests to actually study these subtle shifts.
Hey, hold on. You're telling me there are ways to measure something as slippery as daydreaming. How on earth did they do that?
There are some remarkably clever methods being developed.
Okay.
But before we jump into the how, let's talk about one particularly elegant technique that's caught the attention of many in the field.
Okay.
The breathe-squeeze test.
The what now? Breathe, squeeze. That doesn't sound very high tech.
It's deceptively simple, and that's part of its brilliance.
Right.
Have you ever, suddenly become aware of something you weren't consciously thinking about? Like when you realize you've been holding your breath without meaning to?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Especially when I'm focused on something.
Exactly. This test taps into that. They basically have you take a deep breath and hold it while squeezing a device.
Okay.
The catch is you have to squeeze the device the instant you become aware that you need to breathe.
So they're basically catching that flicker of consciousness when you go from like unconscious breathing to, oh, right, air. Need that. That's wild.
Exactly. It's a really elegant way to study what's happening in the brain during these subtle transitions in awareness.
Okay, so that's one way to measure it. But there has to be more, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not just like handing out squeeze toys to every research subject.
You're absolutely right. There's a whole world of fascinating tools being developed, some more high-tech than others.
Right.
But before we dive into those, let's shift gears a bit and talk about one of the biggest challenges in all of consciousness research, something called the hard problem.
Right, the hard problem. Knew we couldn't have a conversation about consciousness without bumping into that one. Sounds intimidating.
It's definitely a big one.
Yeah.
And to understand it, we need to take a step back and think about what we're actually trying to study here.
So remind me again what the hard problem is really about. I feel like we've been kind of circling it this whole time, talking about the difficulty of defining consciousness, the challenge of measuring it.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. All of those challenges kind of feed into the hard problem. It really boils down to this. Even if we could, like, map out every single neuron firing in your brain, right? Down to the millisecond. Could we explain what it feels like to be you in this moment?
Okay, so I think I'm starting to get it. Science can tell us what my brain is doing, but not what it's like to actually experience the world through my senses, right?
Precisely. We can correlate brain activity with you saying, I see red, but not the actual subjective quality of that redness. It's like
Right.
I can give you a very technical breakdown of how a symphony is orchestrated, but that won't capture the emotional impact it has on the listener.
And that's the heart of the hard problem, this gap between what we can observe in the brain and the inner world of, like, subjective experience.
Exactly. It's a philosophical and scientific puzzle that's been around for centuries. And it makes studying consciousness really, really unique. I mean, after all, the thing we're trying to study is the same thing that's doing the studying.
Whoa, okay, that just made my head spin a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like trying to use your own eyes to study how your eyes work.
A perfect analogy. And it gets even trickier. Right? Remember how we talked about that search for neural correlates of consciousness?
Yeah.
Even if we find them, we run into this very fundamental challenge of science correlation versus causation.
Okay, break that one down for me.
All right, so say we notice a certain pattern of brain activity lights up every time you eat chocolate. Okay.
Okay.
Does that mean that specific pattern causes the experience of enjoying chocolate?
Mm.
Or is it just something that's happening in the brain at the same time with no causal link?
Right, it could be like my brain sending signals to digest the chocolate, which is totally unrelated to the taste itself.
Precisely. Or, a different area lights up when you recall a happy memory involving chocolate. But that doesn't mean that's where happiness is generated in the brain. Teasing apart these relationships is incredibly difficult.
So even with all our fancy brain scans and AI and all this stuff, we're still a long way from solving this hard problem.
We are, but there are some promising avenues. And this is where things get really interesting, I think, because it's not just neuroscientists who are grappling with these questions. Philosophers have been debating the nature of consciousness for millennia.
Oh, right. I almost forgot we were wading into philosophy territory here. What are some of the big ideas that they're bringing to the table?
Well, some philosophers would argue that consciousness is ultimately reducible to physical processes in the brain, right? That once we figure out the how, the why will become clear.
Okay.
Others believe that consciousness is something called an emergent property. Like, you can't understand the wetness of water by just studying individual hydrogen and oxygen atoms in isolation, right?
Right.
It emerges from their interaction.
So consciousness is more than the sum of our brain's parts. That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
It is. And then there are even more radical views. Have you ever heard of panpsychism?
Can't say that I have. Sounds ominous.
It's a fascinating, albeit somewhat fringe, idea.
Okay.
Panpsychism suggests that consciousness might not be limited to brains at all. It proposes that consciousness could be like this fundamental property of the universe itself, present in varying degrees in all things.
Well, so you're saying, like, my coffee mug could be conscious. I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of existential crisis.
It's definitely a lot to take in. And to be clear, panpsychism is just one theory among many, right? But it highlights just how much we don't know about consciousness.
Okay, so we've got neuroscientists mapping the brain, we've got philosophers debating the nature of experience, and now, potentially, conscious coffee mugs. That's why I love the deep dive. Where do we
Yeah.
even go from here?
That's the exciting part. It's a field wide open with possibilities. But one thing's for sure, cracking the code of consciousness, it's going to require a truly collaborative effort.
So what would that look like?
Imagine neuroscientists, philosophers, computer scientists, even artists, all working together, sharing their unique perspectives and their tools. Maybe, just maybe, it'll take AI to help us understand our own consciousness, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a mind bender considering how this whole thing started.
You're right, back to that AI oracle again, full circle. So it sounds like the future of consciousness research is less about finding, like, a single answer and more about exploring all these different avenues.
Exactly. It's about asking bigger and bolder questions, like if consciousness isn't consigned to the brain, where else might we find it? What forms could it take?
Okay, my mind is officially blown. If consciousness isn't confined to the brain, where else might we find it? What forms could it take? Those are some seriously big questions.
They really are. What if, and go with me on this for a second, what if we could one day create Artificial systems that are truly conscious.
Okay.
Or even wilder, what if we could communicate with non-biological forms of consciousness that are out there in the universe?
Okay, now that's some next level stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Communicating with a conscious AI. Sign them up. But but seriously, how would we even begin to recognize non-biological consciousness? What would we look for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It challenges our very definition of consciousness. We might be looking for patterns in data, complex communication signals from space, maybe, or even something as subtle as like unexpected behavior in quantum systems.
So instead of searching for something that looks and acts like us, we need to broaden our perspective and consider entirely new possibilities.
Exactly. It's like that AI oracle hinted at. Our current understanding of consciousness, it's a blind spot.
Yeah.
To break through that, we need to be open to the unknown, the unexpected, the seemingly impossible.
This reminds me of something you said earlier about how studying consciousness requires such a collaborative effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
It feels like we need more than just scientists and philosophers now. We need futurists, artists, maybe even science fiction writers to help us imagine what we don't even know to look for.
I completely agree. We need to break free from all of our preconceived notions and embrace a truly interdisciplinary approach. Imagine artists interpreting this complex data from space,
Yeah.
or writers crafting stories that can help us envision different forms of consciousness. It's about pushing the boundaries of what we think we know.
This has been an incredible deep dive, to say the least. We went from orchestras in the brain to conscious coffee mugs to communicating with aliens. Where does it all leave us?
I think it leaves us with this sense of awe and wonder, honestly, about the universe and our place in it. We've only just scratched the surface of understanding this thing we call consciousness.
It certainly makes you realize just how much more there is to discover. So, to our listeners, we'll leave you with this. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep an open mind. The next great breakthrough in consciousness research, well, it might come from the most unexpected place. Thanks for joining us in this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brainwaves buzzing.